Welcome one, welcome all to episode 11 of the Matty B Show. In this week's episode, we recap the 2020 Oscars, we look at Bernie Sanders' big win in the Democratic primaries, we take a detour to look at some of the weirdest news stories of the week, and of course, we answer a question sent in by you guys in What Matters. Alrighty, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the show. Hope you've had a good week. Hope it's been a happy week. Hope it's been one that hopefully you've got some rest, some recouping. But let's jump in to our first topic for today. We're going to be looking at the 2020 Oscars. Now, these happened earlier this week, and of course, as is the case with every Oscars every year, a little bit of controversy. We'll dive into that, but what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a look at some of the main category winners, and then after that, have a look at some of the other big winners of the award show. So there's no better place to start off than Best Picture. Now, Best Picture, for those that don't know, is pretty much the best movie of the year as picked by the judges and the critics that are in charge of the Oscars. So that is pretty much all the context you need to know with that specific award. Now, Best Picture this year went to Parasite, which was a Korean film. I personally haven't watched it, seeing as though I don't know any Korean. Wouldn't have been able to understand it. But there was quite a bit of a hatred and I'd say controversy surrounding this film because of that fact. Now, I'm gonna say this completely wrong, but I'm sorry, whoever or however you pronounce this, it's just not going to be correct. So, Bong Joon-ho, hopefully that was close enough. He had an amazing Oscars campaign. He won four awards, including Best Director and, of course, Best Picture, which is amazing, and good on him for making such a great banger movie that all of these critics really, really loved. But the biggest criticism that was leveled here wasn't from the critics, of course, because they loved this. They really appreciated, the art behind this movie. It was from the general public, and unfortunately, it was from a specific part of the general public. And that was because the movie wasn't an English-speaking film. And so many people were upset about that because for some reason, apparently the Oscars or Best Picture has to have an English-speaking film win it, which is, I think, absolutely ridiculous. It's just blatant racism, and it's pretty disgusting to see that so many people, both in the journalism space and in just looking at even the Facebook comments on any post, go have a look on any post congratulating him and the team for creating the movie. I guarantee within the first 10 or so comments you will see somebody complaining about the fact that this film is not in English and is rather an international film. And it's just silly to think that it's just silly to think that an English film has to win the Oscars. I mean, first of all, for one, the racism there, it's deplorable and just goes to show how far we really have to go in defeating racism, because at the moment in our current political climate, Asian people weren't really the scapegoat for many race issues. That has unfortunately been, within the past 20 years, post 9/11, been unfortunately put on Arabic people and people from the Middle East, who have become the scapegoat and have been the blame for, whatever issue people see in the world, which is, of course, unfair. But, we didn't really think of Asian people as having that large of a racism problem. But it just goes to show that once there's fuel, there's a fire, and it's really sad to see. And then this is quite a small thing compared to the racial hysteria coming from the coronavirus. Seeing some terrible racism against Chinese people, against even any person of Asian descent. It's really sad to see, and I think these two things culminating together has put a unfortunate spotlight on what the world is like, and how far we have to come. Now, the other thing with this is that if we excluded any film that wasn't English speaking, then the Oscars would lose some of their merit, I'd say. I think it wouldn't really be a fair assessment of the world of film in that particular year, where it'd be only an American or a westernized point of view, and you're cutting out not only the Asian perspective, but the Eastern European, the African, even some of the other Asian markets such as China and Japan and all these other countries that also create fantastic films. And I think it's really an issue quite poignant in America that has to be American made to become an award-winning film. To be the best, it must be American, and that sort of mindset is ridiculous, of course, because the rest of the world, well, it has something to say, and I think completely neglecting it and saying you can't be the best film of the year because you're not English speaking is a joke. And I'm sure, I haven't watched Parasite, I'm sure it's a great film, and I think many people are missing out if they're completely painting the film with just the one blanket, and that's a real shame to see. The next award that we're going to be looking at is for Best Actress, and once again, this is another difficult name. I'm terrible with names. I'm terrible with even the most simple pronunciations. So I'm going to give this one another red hot crack. If it doesn't come off, then I'm sorry. So Best Actress went to Renee Zellweger, hopefully that's right, for her portrayal in Judy. And I personally have not watched this movie either, but it does recount the life of Judy Garland, who was a rather iconic mid-century American singer and actor who died in 1969. Now, that name, Judy Garland, is probably going to sound familiar to you guys, but you won't be able to specifically put a fingerprint on who that is. So let me say, you guys will absolutely recognize who Judy Garland is after this. If you don't know her, she was Dorothy from the original 1939 Wizard of Oz film. So that's where you will recognize that name from. Seeing as though I haven't watched the movie, I can't make too much of a comment on whether she deserved it or not, but congratulations to her for winning the award in the first place. Now, Best Actor, and this one was, a bit of a surprise. It went to Joaquin Phoenix for the Joker film. Now, I think this is a pretty significant win, mainly because he beat out some other really high caliber actors. Leonardo DiCaprio for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is probably the biggest name that he beat out there, but I think this is pretty significant because it's the first time that anybody outside of Heath Ledger has won an Oscar for a comic book or superhero film. Now, I think it's groundbreaking in the sense that it finally legitimizes the fact that these are actual movies with well thought out plots and characters. You've seen people like Martin Scorsese absolutely rip into the Marvel Cinematic Universe for being just a CGI fest full of, incomprehensible action. And I guess, sure, there are parts of those films that are like that, but that is by design. I think he's completely glossing over the fact that there is potential for some really well thought out character development and plot driven stories in comic book films. And I think, this Joker film was pretty pretty impressive, and the fact that Joaquin Phoenix won the Oscar for Best Actor really finally puts the fact that superhero movies are allowed to be good, on the map. I also, now that I think about it, don't think it is a coincidence that both Heath Ledger and Phoenix won awards for playing the Joker. I think the Joker is probably a character that is very complex, very detailed and layered, but is actually seen as very simple in, regular society. And I think the fact that these two actors were able to create some nuance and differentiate themselves from this, I don't know, stereotypical view of the Joker, who was, just seen to be this crazy guy. Think, the Jack Nicholson Joker, he was just, insane for the sake of being insane. And that was a great portrayal of that character. But I think Heath Ledger and Phoenix really put some depth into him, and, helped people see that this character was more than meets the eye. And I think in the future, we'll see more and more films like this, and more films from a comic book background that have a real chance of winning some awards, because we've finally seen one do it. So it's only a matter of time before other people say, hey, that Joker film, pretty good, let's go out and try and make our own. And I think that's really impressive, and congrats to DC and the team for actually making a movie that wasn't complete garbage. Yes, I'm looking at you, Justice League. Now, Best Director, like I said, I'm going to butcher this name again, Bong Joon-ho, I don't know, won this award for Parasite. So I won't dive into this too much. I've already spoken about that film and, some of the controversy surrounding it. But what I think is interesting is something that Natalie Portman did. If you guys don't know, she's an actor. She's in the Thor film. She's in the Star Wars prequel trilogy. She's in, quite a few recognizable movies that you guys probably have seen before. And what she did with her dress this year was embroider the names of women directors who were snubbed for nominations, as no females were nominated for Best Director this year. Now, I don't know nearly enough about movies to make a comment on whether a woman should or should not have been nominated. I guess if there was a film directed by a woman that was good enough that got snubbed, that's pretty crappy. But then again, I just don't know enough about films to make a comment there. But I think what she did was a nice show of solidarity, and I respect the fact that she went out there and did it. It's, sticking it to Hollywood is a pretty risky thing when it comes to, saving, or not saving, but, prolonging your career. I think many people have tried to make social comments regarding particularly gender who have found themselves, unfortunately, on the outer of Hollywood, having their careers kind of die down because they're just being suppressed by, the powers that be, who don't really agree with the facts or agree with the point that they're arguing. So, good on her for going out there and doing that. So that's pretty much the big four awards out of the way. So let's go on to, we've got two more films to mention. 1917 won 3 Oscars. 1917 is the war film that recently came out. It won Oscars for sound mixing, cinematography, and visual effects. If you have watched that movie, you will absolutely agree that it is a stunningly shot film. I think it's very, not beautiful because it's about war, but it's a very aesthetically well put together little film. Really, really good. And then Ford vs Ferrari also won multiple Oscars as well. They won for film editing and sound mixing, and that's fair enough. You know, a film about cars and racing at Le Mans. I think sound mixing is very vital. Getting the sounds right. You want to be immersed in the situation, immersed in the racing, immersed in, you know, all of the different noises that a car and an engine can make. So, you know, really good job to them for getting that done and, you know, winning those Oscars. I'm not going to mention the rest of the Oscars now, though, just because if I were, we'd be here for hours and hours talking about every single little category. And I'll be honest, I don't think I'm an expert enough to have a chat about every single aspect of filmmaking. So we just covered the Big Boy Awards, and let's head in to our next topic. We are now going to have a look at some American politics. Politics isn't something I've explored before on this podcast too in depth, so I think it'd be interesting to jump in and have a look at the Democratic primaries that have started up this week to see who will be going up against Donald Trump in the 2020 US presidential election. So, for those of you who don't know what the primaries are, let me explain. I'm going to explain it as simply as I can. And also, I am an Aussie, so I'm not fully across it all, and I'm obviously not going to have a full, in-depth knowledge about every single thing that's happening, but I'll try my best. So, the Democratic Party is one of the parties in the US, just like Labor and Liberals are here in Australia. Now, the Democratic Party has around about 4,000 delegates. And a delegate is someone who is authorized to represent other people in a vote. Now, each delegate has a certain amount of people that they are responsible for. Now, all of these people go and vote, just like a normal election. They go vote for who they think should be the person to go up against Donald Trump. And for each delegate, whichever candidate their constituents vote for is the person they have to back or give their vote to in the primaries, which is how they choose the candidate to go up against Donnie T. Now, is that confusing? Yes. But these primaries have just started, and so far, the two states of Iowa and New Hampshire have voted. That is of my recording on the 14th of February, so nothing else has happened yet. Let's just, wait and see what is going on. But it's important to talk about this because these two states have two real important things behind who wins them. The first being, this is generally a good litmus test to see who is most likely to win the nomination. Now, this absolutely does not guarantee a winner at all. There is still so much voting to do. But historically, looking back, you can kind of make an assumption on who they will select depending on how this vote goes. And more importantly, and this is why we take such keen eyes and considerations to these first two states, there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of media hype and money to be gained here. If you win these two states, you are going to get significantly more media attention than the other people you are going up against, simply because of the fact that people go, oh wow, Bernie won in New Hampshire. Look at all of the things that he has, pledged to do. This is why he won, yada, yada, yada. And that means more people have their ears out. More people are able to listen and go, oh, yep, all right, I think I want to vote for that person because I know so much more about them now. And I am going to support them to hopefully become president in the Democratic Party's case. And of course, it's also just interesting to look at. So we're going to jump in. Now, in reality here, you only need to know about 4 names in this Democratic race. So there is 78-year-old Bernie Sanders. He was the U.S. representative from Vermont from 1991 to 2007, and he was senator from Vermont from 2007 to now. There is 38-year-old Pete Buttigieg, also another difficult name for me to pronounce. He was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana from 2012 to 2020. There is 77-year-old Joe Biden, who was US Senator from Delaware from 1973 all the way up to 2009. And you will most likely recognize this. He was the Vice President of the United States from 2009 to 2017 under Barack Obama. And then the 4th name that you need to know is 70-year-old Elizabeth Warren, who was the US Senator from Massachusetts from 2013 to now. There is a 5th name that you might want to know, and that name is Michael Bloomberg, and he's pretty much just this big old rich guy that's kind of thrown his hat into the ring very late into the piece compared to these other candidates, but he's gotten quite a lot of support, which is interesting to see. He has much more money to throw around than any of these other 4, so he has the most resources to gain some followers, and whilst he's not quite up to the support levels that these 4 have at the moment, he is rising very quickly, and a name you should look out for coming into these future primaries. Now, straight off the bat, I want to talk about Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren, because way back when this process started, towards the beginning of or midway through 2019, these 2 were your favorites. They were the 2 that most people thought had the highest chance of getting through the primaries and becoming the Democratic presidential candidate. Mainly because, well, Elizabeth Warren, she has the vote associated with women, and she was just, as a whole, a very popular senator. And then Joe Biden, just because he was the seasoned professional, just coming off, his time as the vice president. So people thought, you know what, he's got a good shot at this as well. Even though he was a presidential candidate in the past and didn't really do too well, they thought, you know what, maybe it's his time to shine. But they have really disappointed these first 2 votes in Iowa and New Hampshire. They have done pretty badly. So currently, Elizabeth Warren is in 3rd place and Joe Biden is in 5th place. So it's interesting to see that they aren't that 1-2 that people were predicting, but rather 3 and 5 by like slim margins. They both could possibly have slid down to 4 and 5, which is, a little bit worrying, I'd say, for them. Now, these 2 are what most people would consider moderates within the Democratic Party. So they're closer to the center of the political spectrum, and you've had people from the left, mainly, or the one most recognizable being Bernie Sanders, just taking shots at these guys for, things that he considers to be undesirable. One thing that he has been riding on quite a lot in the last couple of weeks is the fact that Bernie Sanders is the only Democratic candidate without a donor who is a billionaire. So he's trying to say, look, I'm here to help the poor. I want to support middle class and lower class America, and these other candidates have support from vested interests from billionaires who are only going to want support for the rich. And that's one of the big things that he's been advocating for in the first stages of the vote. Now, this isn't the be-all and end-all, of course, like I said, but it's not looking particularly good for them. I'm not sure if they will be able to recover from quite a large deficit, percentage wise. The delegate total numbers isn't a massive discrepancy. I think Bernie Sanders, last time I checked, had 20 and Elizabeth Warren had 8, so only a 12 difference there, and there are 4,000 voters. But you got to look at the percentages of, who's voting. So Bernie had around 26% of the popular vote in New Hampshire, but Warren and Biden were well under 10%, which is, worrying for them. Now, let's talk about the other two names that I mentioned before, Buttigieg and Sanders. Now, the voting in Iowa was quite a mess. It's, for one, very close, but also that they've done some electronic voting this time, and it's just really, really messy and really, really confusing for everyone. So there hasn't been a winner determined in that state yet, but it is one of those two, and no matter who does win, it'll be close. So could be Bernie by a slim margin, could be Pete by a slim margin as well. Now, looking at New Hampshire, Bernie won this, which is pretty positive for him, and he won this. Doesn't sound convincingly, seeing as though the vote split was 26% to him and 24% to Buttigieg, but he won this fairly well. Now, this is big for a few reasons, and that is because nobody really saw this coming from Sanders, and he has been subject to so much criticism for being, what some would consider a socialist, towards the left of the political spectrum. Some people call him a communist. I don't agree that he is a communist at all, and he has also come out and explicitly said, guys, chill out, I'm not a communist. But, despite this, fear tactic that's been put against him, trying to say, oh, Bernie's a communist, he's a lefty, he's a socialist, watch out, he's going to take your money, he's going to take your jobs, and he's going to try to control you. He's really galvanized his supporter base, and it has amassed very, very quickly, and he is looking like, at the moment, the leader in this Democratic candidate race, which is, impressive for a man who's tried again and, never really broken through. Maybe now this will be the time that Bernie goes big and wins. Another important or big thing that would happen if Bernie Sanders was the Democratic candidate for president, and let's just say, not guaranteed at all, but let's just say he does beat Donald Trump, he would be by far, and I mean by far, the oldest sitting president the United States has ever had. So, Jimmy Carter is the oldest US president currently alive still. He's 95 years old. But I'm talking about the age that they were when they were president. So, the oldest person to be president of the United States is the bloke that is in charge now. Donald Trump is 70 years old, and he's the oldest guy to ever be president. If Bernie Sanders was to win the election, he would be 78. He might be 79. Not sure when his birthday is specifically, but he would be almost 10 years older than the current oldest president ever, which is quite big, because I think that's another big criticism against him too. People are saying, oh, Bernie's 78, he had a heart attack and he might die. And that's a real morbid thing to go after on a political stage, but people will do anything for votes, I guess. And, it's obviously something you've got to take into consideration. But, he would be by far the oldest sitting president if he was to be elected. Now, estimations-wise, it is estimated that Buttigieg has one more delegate than Sanders. But the fact that, as it stands right now, Sanders has won a state and Buttigieg hasn't, means that Bernie's stock is on the increase. And He's getting that media attention. He's getting that extra cash rolling in to hopefully expand his campaign and improve that for himself. Now, the one thing that I do want to say about Bernie is that he is undoubtedly one of the most genuine political figures I have ever seen. Now, he believes in every word he says, and he genuinely cares about people and wants to make sure that he can improve their lives. And I think no matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on, left, center, or right, you can say, all right, I can tell that Bernie Sanders gives a crap. And I think there are so many political figures who, sound scripted in our current society, who sound like they have a hidden agenda. And it's refreshing to hear someone who genuinely believes and cares about what they say, even if you don't agree with his views. And I think I think it's particularly positive the fact that he's in politics just to try and make a positive difference and try help, somebody, help the lives of the people around him. And I think even if he was on the right, you would still be able to say, all right, at least I know Bernie really is trying, and he cares about people, even if, you might think that his views are a bit misguided. And I think you can look at someone like Scott Morrison, who, is seen as, old Scotty from marketing, and you get that vibe behind him that just makes you not trust a word he says, even if you are on his side of the spectrum and say, you could be on the right wing, you could be a member of the Liberal Party and still say, I don't believe a word this geezer says. I don't think, you wouldn't trust him. And I think it's a cool juxtaposition to see that from Bernie. And I really respect him for actually going out there and giving a crap about people. Now, it is time to look forward in this Democratic race for Super Tuesday, which is coming up quite soon. And that is where 16 states all vote at the same time. And around 40% of the delegates will go out on this day, which is quite a large amount. Now, on Super Tuesday, there is not quite a high possibility, but there is a possibility that we might find out who will take on Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election. At the moment, we're not sure who that is going to be, but it's going to be super interesting to follow and super interesting to see who will be the man or woman to take on, Big Donald and the Republican Party. So I'm excited to see how this all unfolds, and really excited, to see who wins. I hope you guys are enjoying the episode so far. This is the Matty B Show, coming from Spotify, Apple, Google, Deezer, and Whooshka. If you have any questions that you would like answered on the podcast, make sure you send them in to mattybpodcast@gmail.com. Make sure to follow me on Facebook, The Matty B Show. Make sure to also follow me on Instagram, The Matty B Show there as well. I'd love to see the support grow. It would be great to see. But with that being said, let's head in to the rest of today's episode. All right, welcome back from the mid-podcast break there, everybody. Now we're going to jump into something a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more fun after a fairly intense, I would say, few topics there with Bernie going big and the Oscars. So let's jump into something a little bit more chill, a little bit more relaxed. And this is something I've wanted to do for quite a while. I've been doing a bit of research in the past couple of days and in the last week or so, looking at some terrible pieces of journalism. And I don't mean terrible journalism in terms of content. I mean in terms of bad intent. You know, people out there trying to cause division, people out there trying to stir up some hate. And it's a little bit of a special podcast that I want to work on, you know, get some of the best examples of terrible journalism out there just to, you know, expose it a little bit and talk about what I really think about it. But along the way, I've had to read quite a few articles, just seeing what they're about to see if there was anything suspicious or bad in there. And I've come across some really positive articles, I've come across some real negative articles, but the ones that we are going to be looking at today are the weirdest, wackiest, and funniest ones that I have seen along the way. And there's 3 here that I think are really, really great, and I can't wait to tell you guys about them because they're bangers to say the least. So the first story, it's a great one. I found this, you know, it was pretty much everywhere for a day or two, and it was about this kid on The Project, which is a show here in Australia. Now, this boy was on the show because his family were talking to the hosts about how good it was for the farmers to finally get some rain. They were a farming family, and you know, how good is the water that they're getting, right? But if you looked closely and if you looked real carefully, this kid was sitting there and he had the biggest smile on his face. He was looking great, so happy. But then you see that smile sort of drag to the right of his face, and you're like, oh, what is this kid doing? He's making some funny ass faces. And then he sticks his tongue out, and you're like, okay, maybe he's trying to be funny on national TV. But no, what do you see him do? He grabs one fly that is landed on his cheek and pulls it into his mouth, chews for a little bit, then swallows it. He ate a fly on national TV. But wait, it doesn't stop there. Another fly, I don't know, probably looking for his buddy that's all of a sudden gone missing, lands on the same place on his cheek. And the kid goes from smiling to eating the fly again. This kid ate 2 flies on national TV in Australia. And oh my God, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen. I'm watching the replay now, and he doesn't even try to hide it, guys. He's like a bloody lizard. He scoops them up with his tongue and just chows down on them. Honestly, if you want to pause the podcast now, just Google or go onto YouTube or something and search up "kid eats flies on TV." I'm sure it'll be the first, video that pops up. And it's one of the weirdest things I've seen in ages. And I just love the fact that a ton of legitimate news sites have picked it up and run it as actual news. You know, that's something you'd think that just like a joke news site would, you know, run. But no, there are some proper news sites that are running the story about this rando kid who ate a fly on TV. Oh, it's just, I wonder how much protein is in a fly. Look, you're going to hear me typing here, but I don't care. I want you guys to figure this out with me. I wonder how many calories are in a fly. All right, 5 calories in one fly, and 1 gram of protein. So a nice, nutritious snack for anybody that is feeling a little bit hungry on their day out. Okay, wait. No, so if an average adult male is supposed to have, isn't it like 2,500 calories a day? And you divide 2,500 by 5. This kid, an adult man would have to eat 500 flies a day to get, the recommended daily amount of calories. Oh my God, that's 500 grams of protein as well. That's like having a steak. Gee, no wonder why there are so many countries saying we should eat bugs. That's bloody great. Oh, yummy. Wow. So yeah, that was one of the funniest stories that I've seen in quite a while. Now, the next one, it's not even funny. It's just sick. And the fact that this was on the ABC, the national broadcaster here in the country, just makes it so much cooler. And this was a story about some Canadian scientists, right? They discovered a new dinosaur. All right, that's pretty cool. They discover new dinosaurs all the time up there in Canada because that is one of the hotspots for dinosaur species, it turns out. And I read it, and I was going to scroll past, but then I read the byline. And I read it because this dinosaur that they have just discovered was related to the T-Rex. And because I'm, got the mental age of a 10-year-old, I was like, oh, T-Rex, that's sick. So I clicked on it, and I read that this thing was 8 meters long, was 2.5 meters tall, and had teeth on average length of 74 millimeters. And, that's bloody massive, right? It's a big-ass dinosaur, and it's going to ruin your day if you meet one. And essentially, this thing was just a T-Rex. They were like cousins or brothers or, I can't remember what specifically they described it as. And, that's all well and good. There are, 7 or 8 Tyrannosaurus dinosaurs that have been discovered in that region of Canada and the northern United States. And I was like, okay, cool. It's another one to add to the list. And I was like, yep, that seems about it. I would have put it on this podcast no matter what. But then I learned what they named this damn thing. So the first word is Greek. And I'm not going to be able to pronounce this at all, just like with those names in the Oscars part of the episode. But the Greek word is Thanatosaurus. Oh, you know what? That's not even close. I'm going to try again. Thanatosaurus. Right? That was close enough. But, that's not the important part here. The important part here is that word in Greek means reaper of death in English. That is going to be the most frightening and intimidating name I've ever heard for anything. They named this dinosaur the Reaper of Death. That is so vicious. Why do the Greek even have a word for that? When in a sentence are you ever going to be using that word? And oh man, that's just wild. And I think that's a sick as name for a dino, and I love it. That's mad. Now let's finish this segment with a cute one, and this is definitely by far my favorite story of the week, despite the fact that we had Kid Eats Fly on national TV, and that's a close second, I think. But there is this little golden retriever doggo, and golden retrievers are my favorite type of dog. Fun fact about me. And this little golden retriever is named Finley, and he's 6 years old, and that's like 40 in dog years, but 6 still sounds young, right? But guess what? This dog has a world record, right? And that world record is for fitting the most tennis balls in his mouth out of any dog, right? He put 6 full regular sized tennis balls in his mouth and beat the previous record of 5. Bro, if you see this photo of him, he just looks so happy with himself. He's like, look, Mum, I did it. I put all 6 tennis balls in my mouth. Are you proud of me now? And look, Finley, yes, I am proud of you. Good job. You're a bloody hero. You're a good boy. You deserve lots of pats for that. That's awesome. That's my favorite story of the week by far. So now it is time to jump in to What Matters, our Q&A segment on the show. Welcome to What Matters, the segment where I, Matty B, am grossly unqualified to answer the important questions that you ask me. But still, I'll do it. Okie dokie. So, today's episode has a question in from Kyle. And Kyle is a good friend of mine. Everyone say hi to Kyle. Hi, Kyle. Awesome. Now, his question is this. Hey, Matt. Love the show. Keep up the great work. Thanks for that, Kyle. I really appreciate it. He continues in saying, I know you're a lover of sport, so I'll keep this car on that road. Awesome. That's great to see. All over the world, the rise of women's sport has been a mostly positive thing. Young girls are encouraged to keep playing cricket, rugby, soccer, etc., when previously they used to either make the switch to a traditionally more female welcome sport or a fully female oriented sport, i.e. netball. However, there still is, justified or not, a large pay disparity between women and men. Women's sport is still mostly attracting less attendance, viewers, and sponsors compared to the men's. However, as an avid sports watcher, I can verify that the contest and the skill is still there, and the competition is fierce. Top level female athletes are still forced to work other jobs to supplement their income and are not able to solely focus on honing their craft. In your opinion, is the pay gap justified? And secondly, how can there be an increase in demand for women's sport, hence more revenue, leading to higher pay for women in sport? Whew. All right, read that all out, sweet. So, before I jump in, thanks, Kai, for the question. It's a really good one, a thought-provoking one. Hopefully, give a good enough answer. I want to start off by saying that I think it is ridiculous that female athletes have to work jobs outside of their chosen sport. That, for one, is just unfair and can become an unhealthy workload for them to undertake. But two, and I think this is probably part of the ingrained problem with female sport, is when female athletes have significantly less time than men to train and hone their craft, as you said, they truly can't become elite and as good as they possibly can be. It takes away from their potential, which then, of course, takes away from the spectacle of the sport. It takes away from how interesting female sport is perceived by the masses. So I think all women athletes, without a doubt at all, should be able to support themselves just through sport, without a doubt. And I think organisations like the FFA, Football Federation Australia, and Cricket Australia have taken big steps to improve this and to make sure that their athletes are able to just play their chosen sport and be able to support themselves. So I think they've taken some big steps there, and I think the rest of the female sporting codes need to also take that step. I don't care if it hurts your profits. It's about these athletes and making sure that they are happy, healthy, and able to sustain themselves. Now, a flow-on effect from this would be that it is less and less likely for multi-sport players to be a thing in female sports, which I think you've seen throughout history of women's sport has been a big thing. I think a great, or not even a great, but an example of this is Elise Perry. Now, Elise Perry used to play in the W League, which is soccer, and she also played cricket, playing for Australia, but also playing domestically for New South Wales and the Sydney Sixers and whatnot. But recently, she's quit soccer, and that is because she is now able to financially support herself just playing the one sport. And it is now financially viable for her to do that, which means she has way more time to improve her game, which then improves the sport as a whole. And when the sport as a whole improves, viewership improves. And when viewership improves, revenue improves. And when revenue improves, the pay that these female athletes are receiving is higher. Now, I think as that becomes a more and more common thing, the standard of women's sporting codes all around the world will increase and will result in higher revenue but it's still a long journey ahead. In an ideal world, I would absolutely love to see female athletes earn just as much money as male athletes. But however, as the saying goes, money makes the world go round. Let's take the NBA, basketball, and the WNBA, also basketball, for example. In the NBA, the men receive 50% of all revenue that comes into the sport, resulting in some of the most lucrative sporting contracts in the world. Stephen Curry, one of the best players in the league, is making $40 million a year before sponsorships and before endorsements, and that's a ridiculous amount of money. The WNBA, on the other hand, the athletes only get around 20 to 30% of the revenue. Now, I think that should be 50% to be equal with the male share. And even if this happened, which I think it will in the future, WNBA players would receive way less total money than men. But still, this is an equitable result. Equitable, not equal, equitable. And I think this is the first step that needs to be taken. Having the same revenue sharing for men and women is the first step that needs to be taken. We can't take advantage of our women athletes in this sense because it's just not good for the sport. And I think as the saying goes, Rome wasn't built in a day, and women's sporting contracts won't be equal in total money for men's for a long time, and that's just because of basic financial aspects. But I do think the first step is getting equitable shares of money going out to the athletes. The NBA attracted $8 billion in revenue in 2018, whilst the WNBA attracted 60. So that means that the NBA bring in about 133 times more money. So it's unrealistic to expect equal pay, but you must demand equitable pay. We can't take advantage of women athletes and drive them away from playing sport. Otherwise, no progress will ever be made. Now, as you alluded to, how do we get more money and get more interest? How do we do that, Kyle? Honestly, I think it's a purely generational thing. I think that the interest in female sports has increased incredibly even over the last 10 years. And I think that going into the future, you will continue to see that trend to happen. And as more progressive and as more open-minded people are born, they are more and more likely to be welcoming and accepting of women's sport. And as time goes on, fostering this supporter base and increasing it will also increase the revenue that the sports can bring in. The other part that is generational here is the skill level. We are only now just seeing female athletes who can be full-time sports people. And what this means is that the only thing that can happen from here is that the sport itself will improve. And as they do get better, the more likely we will see support for women's games grow. And I think that's a great thing. And I really do think it all just comes down to time. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, is what they say. So you won't be able to teach a sports fan ingrained and in love with male sport to change that. But with future generations, you can. And I think it's truly great to see more and more women get out there aspiring to be female athletes, and in particular aspiring to female role models. And I can't wait for it to grow further. Hopefully to the point where women can earn as much as men. I would love for the WNBA to bring in $8 billion just like the NBA does. But we aren't there yet. And I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure if we ever will get there, which is quite sad. But we owe it to all of the women in our lives, our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our girlfriends, our wives, to try. And to be honest, we aren't trying, and it's time to go out there and make women's sport just sport. And I think that's really important. Hopefully in the future that will happen. So Kyle, thanks for the great question. It was a really thought-provoking one today. I had a good time sitting down and thinking about what I was going to say about that. So I really appreciate the great question. Hopefully you can send a few more in because that was awesome. Now, that has been the show today, everyone. But before we go, please follow me on Facebook and Instagram, The Matty B Show, on both of those platforms. Send in your emails to mattybpodcast@gmail.com. Please send in some more questions. We are running low on questions, and sooner rather than later, we will be out of questions for what matters, and we don't want that. Also, for those of you listening on Apple and Google, please leave a rating. Hopefully a positive one, but if it's a negative one, tell me what I'm not doing well. Hopefully I'll be able to improve from there. I would really appreciate that. And we also have a big announcement today. If you were following me on Facebook, you would have seen this already, but we are now on YouTube. For those of you that like listening to the podcast on YouTube, well, guess what? There is now an opportunity for that to happen. Awesome. That's great. I'll chuck the link into both the Facebook posts and the description of the podcast. And I would really appreciate if you guys could go check that out. Chuck a subscribe, chuck a like if you could, share it around, and grow this little community that we have going. But with that being said, I hope you have enjoyed today's episode. I hope you will be back next week to listen to the next episode. Have a great week. And that has been that.